Well, welcome everybody on this noon time here in June. Hope everybody's having a great summer. What I wanted to do was just kind of kick us off and kind of talk a little bit about where we've come from as we've done these monthly webinars starting, back the end of last year. And then Archie's going to kind of dive into some of the details about our topic this month, which is going out in style. How to build your business with the end in mind. And then from there, we'll just kind of talk back and forth and share some of our own personal experiences, and then we'll open it up for questions. And then maybe at the end, Caroline, we can just talk a little bit about sort of the plans going forward and some of the topics we have coming up. So with that, if I can get my computer screen to move. There we go. Anyone who's been on the prior webinars knows I always start with this slide, mostly because I think it's one of the most simple questions you'll ever ask yourself or be asked when you start a business, but maybe one of the hardest to answer. And the first time I ever used this question, I was the one asking it of another entrepreneur, which I most prefer because it's easier to ask the question than to answer it. And I remember taking a job with a gentleman, a tech alum actually, who had a business. And my question to him was, is this a business that's about you, meaning it's a lifestyle business and when you retire, the business is going to go away? Or is it a business that you plan to grow long beyond yourself? And, his initial reaction was to say the latter because it certainly sounds more impressive. But upon further thought, I think what he started to realize is that neither one of those answers is better than the other. They're just very different. Lots of people start businesses to create a job and build a lifestyle business that affords them the opportunities that they want to have in life, whether that's, where they want to live, how they want to travel, the family assets that they want to build. And then when they're ready to retire, the business sort of retires as well. But others really want to build a business that becomes an entity itself and that grows long beyond the founder's retirement. But with that comes a lot of responsibilities that you may not think about in terms of the business isn't you anymore. And that's hard for a lot of entrepreneurs to admit that the business is no longer you, that it has taken on a life of its own. And so it really is a very thoughtful question that you should ask yourself, not just when you start the business, but as you grow it, because your answer can change. And I know a lot of people that start it thinking they want to build a big enterprise that lives long beyond them, and then you get 6 months, a year into it, and you start building this machine that you realize maybe your passion was in doing the trade that the business exists to do and not in managing a whole bunch of people, which might tell you that the other answer was better. So as we go through this today, I just want that to be sort of an overarching question for you as you think about either the business you have or the business that someday you want to start. And so as we think back to where we started earlier this year, we started out focusing on what we call the 4 C's that drive growth. So assuming the answer to the last slide was yes, I want to grow the business, then the way to do that is obviously to grow, you need either more and or larger customers. You have to grow your capacity to be able to serve those customers. You, of course, need the capital to fuel your ability to grow capacity and serve those customers. And then probably most importantly, you have to have the commitment to do it. And as we talked about last month, some of the challenges related to commitment is that it's not just your commitment. You have to have the commitment of those around you, certainly your family, who all will experience the peaks and valleys that come with having a small business. But you also have to have the commitment of your customers. You have to have the commitment of your employees and your team members. You have to have the commitment of your investors or your lenders. And everyone's commitment, hopefully, is towards the same goal. Otherwise, you're going to run amok. Probably not get where you're going. So as we think about those 4 things, I thought the next topic that would be great to talk about is that exit. You can't write a business plan and talk to somebody without them asking, what's your exit strategy? And most of us don't want to talk about the exit strategy when we start because that's something that will happen in the future and only good things are going to happen between now and then. But we all know that the one thing that's certain is that that's not true, that good things will happen and bad things will happen, and there'll be lots of options to think about how you're going to exit this business that you've started And probably what's most important is to have thought through some of those things as you go along. So some of the questions that I just want you to have in the back of your mind, and then I'm going to turn it over to Archie, is, so you started this business, or you want to start a business. You've decided whether it's going to be a lifestyle business or whether it's going to grow to be, a large enterprise. And so now you have to really ask yourself the why. So it's not just the what, but why are you doing this? Are you building your own job security? Are you building a business that's going to live beyond you? If it is going to live on, how is it going to live on? I mean, are you going to hand it to the next generation? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to merge with something else? Are you going to go IPO? There's lots of ways for a business to live on, and all of them look very different. If your plan is to ultimately hand it to someone else or sell it, who's going to buy it? What are the likely characters that would want to buy your business, and why would they want to buy it? I mean, what is the value that it's adding to them? So at the end of the day, you have to really ask sort of what are they buying? I always laugh because you'll meet people who say, well, I'm going to sell my business, and then when they stop and look at what they've built, if you really step back and look at this art form that you've created that is your business, did you build something that other people value, or did you build something that you really love? Lots of us have probably personal art in our house that we think is highly, highly valuable, and nobody else would pay you a dime for it. You might have a house that you sell that you think is the perfect house, and you think it's worth the land plus the house, and everyone else thinks it's worth the land minus the cost to scrape your beautiful house. So, keep those things in mind as Archie kind of walks through. He's got a very unique perspective, having been on the private equity side, so having been the buyer, and then also been on the side where you were selling. So, having that ability to be both the buyer and the seller often helps you put everything in perspective. The next slide is Archie's bio, which Caroline was so gracious to read.
Great job.
But now you can see his face, so you have sort of a face with a name.
The only thing I'd add to that is, and Laura touched on it, is I spent a big chunk of my career as a buyer. And so where I've had these conversations before, I think it's a unique opportunity for either folks thinking about starting a business or current business owners to have a dialogue with a buyer that they aren't actually sitting across the table from looking or negotiating with. Because I certainly wouldn't give you the insights I'm going to give you now if we were negotiating for me to buy your business.
Don't come and sell your business.
Right. So this is a sneak preview or this is a sneak preview or an ability to have the conversation without any real consequence.
There's going to be a whole bunch of buyers on it.
Just to set the context, and again, I've spent a lot of time with a lot of owners of businesses and sellers of businesses, and I do recognize that this is, for a lot of owners who are also founders in most cases, this is their baby. So I recognize there's an emotional attachment. You've given birth to this entity, and it's a part of you in a lot of ways. But the second point is it's also a business. And so when I say that, I mean that to mean for a lot of you, or for a lot of folks, it is not only their largest source of income, but also is the biggest asset that they have as well. And so you have to kind of manage the tension between those two. There's an emotional attachment, but there also is a very real and very substantial commercial aspect to it as well. And then as I think about talking about selling the business or having it go on to whatever its next life stage is, you usually only get one shot at that. And so while there are some serial entrepreneurs who do that a number of times, for the most part, at least most of the buyers,
they just haven't been medicated yet.
I end up, you kind of get one shot at it on your way out to retirement or whatever the next stage of life is. So just setting context. On the next slide, here's some tips at a high level, and Laura touched on this. It's, when you think about starting the business and even as you're running the business, as you start thinking about selling, you do need to start really creating that line between yourself and the business. The buyer, in most cases, particularly a professional buyer, whether that's as a part of a larger firm, and so I was running business development for some large public companies at one point, or a private equity group, they're focused on the company, not on you as the individual. And again, this goes back to really separating you from your baby, so you need to start having that mindset.
Which is different than when you raise that initial capital, because that is about you. They're
That's
investing
exactly
in
right.
you, but then ultimately they're not buying you.
On exit, they need to understand that the business can operate outside of you, or when and if you're deciding to retire, that the business can go on. Leveraging outside expertise, I'll come back to that. Again, when I said it's an important decision, just like every other important decision, you want to make sure you've got as much advice and counsel as you can have. And to be honest, the buyer, the life I led before, I certainly will have both expertise that I know, but I also will have a lot of folks on my side of the table helping me think through all the different permutations of what could happen there.
So you don't want to be sitting by yourself across the table from
Right.
Archie's workshop.
I've got an army, and you're an army of one. To advantage me or advantage buyer in that case for sure. The next one is make it easy to buy, and I'll touch on a lot of these, which is, again, as you start to make that separation of the business, as you start thinking or using the lens of the buyer, how do I make it easy to buy? All of us have either bought a house or some other meaningful asset. Make it easy to buy, and so find ways so that the person can see what it's really about, how it's going to benefit them, and ultimately get the price up. Speaking of price up, number 4 is create an auction, which is just to create competition for it. Once you've decided to sell your business, and as Laura said, you've got a lot of options on how to exit a business. You can shut it down on your way to retirement and kind of close out your last account. You can hand it off to a family member or a current employee or set of executives, or you can sell the business. But if you've decided you want to sell the business, there's a huge benefit. Competition drives price. And so creating the competition for your business is going to be key. And last but not least, have a plan, but stay flexible. I've seen a lot of sellers of businesses think that they know exactly what date they're going to sell it. So if I'm going to retire on December 31st, 2018, that's the day it has to happen. Life obviously doesn't always work that way.
It'll be a really good price on the 30th.
That's exactly right. And so whether that's in terms of terms or timing, there's a benefit to starting the conversation early, having an idea of what you'd like to get done, but also being open to some creative structures for a change in time. This, I think, is one of I think a real look behind the scenes. This scorecard, and almost every business I've looked at in the last 20 years, I've used this in a more detailed form, but it's going to break down as I'm thinking about how valuable a business is to me and what I'm going to pay for a business or how aggressively I'm going to chase a business. Ultimately, is going to line up against these 4 criteria, which I'll touch on in detail in the next few slides, but revenue growth, and we started out talking about growth. Growth is key. A buyer, in most cases, is looking for something that is going to continue to go up and to the right, and they're going to be looking for assurances of that. The more, again, when I say make it easy to buy, the more that you can paint a picture that shows that growth, the better off you're going to be. Not surprisingly, profit is not too far behind that the business actually makes money and is can turn a profit. I'm going to pay a price up front, and that's how I'm going to get a return on that investment. The third category, I don't think a lot of people think about in some different ways. Certainly, there's often some hard assets, but there's a lot of soft assets, and I'll touch on those. Some of them around your people, some of them around your processes, some of them around intellectual property. But there's some interesting insights, I think, in terms of what that list of key assets could look like. And then last but not least, the alignment with the buyer strategy. The more it is exactly the house that I'm looking for, the more likely it is that I'm going to pay up for it and try and preempt the process and do everything I can to own it. If you take those 4 categories and across your business, by the time we get done, you could probably give yourself a grade, if you will, A, B, or C, or D against these categories, and you'll know where you need to spend some time. But not surprisingly, the better you do across those 4 categories, that's going to add up to ultimately what someone's willing to pay for the business. But I think as a group, you can see why they're powerful. We're going to touch on revenue growth, and again, there's a follow-up slide to each of these major buckets. But revenue growth, which is going to drive profit, key assets we're certainly going to talk about, and then trying to make sure we understand what the buyer is looking for is going to drive valuation.
All right. Can you see that new one?
Yes, yes, I can. Perfect.
All right.
So a little bit of context behind revenue growth and sustainability is, certainly you're going to want to see what the history has been. That's going to give you some indication. Again, I'm giving you the view from the buyer. Has there been growth in the past, and how has it come?
Most people like to talk about what they're going to do.
Right.
Not so much what they've done.
The fact that you're in an attractive niche or market, so one that has a high potential for growth, right? So we're certainly going to spend some time there. And then, again, diversification, making sure that there isn't one thing, either one key salesperson is a risk, there's only one client, you're serving just one industry, or you've only got one product. Now, what's interesting here is as you think about growth, this is where there's some opportunities to leverage solutions that are out there to try and help make sure that you've got the opportunity to grow that beyond where the current business is. And then on the number 4 point, your ability to hold on to your customers and keep them happy is key. And then last but not least, around attractive projections. On this one, on the projection side of things, as Laura just said, folks will want to, a lot of folks or sellers would like to talk about what they're going to do. As a buyer, the best indication that you can win the next big account is the fact that you actually have won a big account, right? And so a lot of times at the time you're selling the business, there's this long list of what you could do with the business, but no actual evidence in its history. And this is where I would counsel sellers to say, you don't have to have won every big account that's out there, but you have to have shown that if that's part of the growth strategy that you want me as a buyer to attach value to, show me winning one big account or an account that's larger than average for you. And so, again, I know we've been through a whole series of solutions that can help with that, but I think that's key to one of those next big accounts.
Well, I think one thing, too, is that as you look at these, you'll look at them differently based on who the buyer prospect is, right? So when you look at an attractive market, some people like to show just how massive their market is, but it's probably different if the potential buyer is, say, a private equity firm, right, as opposed to a strategic buyer who might be another player in the same market. They, of course, know how big the industry is. That may be where your niche focus is valuable to them, right? Because they own 2 parts of a market and you present a third that they don't own yet.
That's exactly
right. A lot of people like to put together sort of their story and then they don't adjust it. And you could be talking to 2 totally different buyers who value 2 totally different attributes of your growth potential.
Agreed.
So think about what they already own and where they might want to grow as opposed to just what you want to do. Because they may not, you may have one asset in mind that you think is the most important, and that's not the most important to some buyers. They may view something else important that you thought was just secondary.
100% agree.
And I would definitely say on the diversification, we found this with Nourish when we were talking to folks. We had a lot of potentially strategic buyers that were much bigger players in the market we were in, and we were a niche because it was specific to babies and children. But we also were able to show that, yes, we could sell to airport stores, but we could also sell to Whole Foods, or we could sell to the grocery industry, but we could also sell to the gifting industry. And so, as you can imagine, different buyers would view those differently. Some couldn't care less about the gifting industry, and others, couldn't care less about the consumer packaged goods industry because that's not the world they played in. So really thinking about some of that diversification as a value add.
Exactly. Can we see profit and growth? Great.
Yep.
And this is one where separating, I think there's a couple key points here. Yes, this is one where a lot of owners / sellers of businesses haven't separated themselves from the business. And so on the cost side of things, and it also touches to my make it easy to buy. For a lot of folks, particularly as an entrepreneur, you start your business and there really isn't a lot of separation. You're running the business in some cases off your personal credit card. You've got your car expenses in the business. You've got your dental appointment. Uncle Bubba is on the payroll. These are the and that's all well and good when you own your business and nobody else has to look at it. When it's time to sell it or to get someone else to take a look at it, you want to start cleaning some of that stuff up and make it clear for the buyer exactly what is the true operating profit of the business. And so we touched on revenue and what costs are real in the business versus how much of it is you living in the business. And so that third bullet there on add backs and adjustments, I think that's a place where, quite frankly, a lot of sellers, you lose some value, because if I have to go dig for it and I get smarter about what's real in terms of your cost than you do, you need to know more than I do. If I can figure out, I'll assume there's more unknowns, and I'm going to take a discount for it. If you've already got those laid out and can clearly say, here's what a normalized salary looks like for the person that's going to run it, if it's not me, because again, you have no limit as the owner of the business as to what your salary can be in terms of what you take out. But you want to draw a picture of, if you're going to the beach, here's what it's going to cost to replace you with a third party to run the business, if you will. I think that's what I've got on that one. And then key assets, again, a lot of folks immediately go to, the hard assets. Do I own a building? Do I have some land? Do I have some equipment? I think here it's the softer things, or sometimes the things that aren't talked about as much, that are most valuable here. Again, a buyer, if they're trying to enter a new market, a brand and reputation are key. If they don't have it in their existing business, they're looking to attach themselves to someone who already is well known and well thought of in the marketplace. I touched on intellectual property. Again, these are just, these are some of those hidden gems within the business and the things that are able to allow you to differentiate yourself from everyone else. And then that third bullet on team. Again, this goes back to separating yourself from the business. Businesses are more valuable when there is a broader group of folks who are driving, whether that's sales, whether that's the operations, whether that's new products and solutions in terms of R&D. You're really, in a lot of cases, selling a team, and a team that can be transferred to a new owner. Again, I find a lot of owners who, almost out of ego, well, I drive all of sales, and no one else in the organization has ever talked to one of my customers, and that may make you feel good as a sole proprietor, as an entrepreneur or an owner. That does not sell well, because now I've got to assume that either I'm going to be able to convince you to stick around and be just as engaged as you've always been, or that I'm going to be able to migrate those relationships from you to some new unknown. And again, that adds risk. Adding risk takes down price. I'll move forward to number 6, which is the big one that isn't talked about a lot, and that's looking at not just hard assets on the balance sheet, but some of the financial assets, and the ability to take AR for a lot of organizations is its biggest asset. If you look at a balance sheet, particularly for service businesses, one of the biggest line items on there is going to be accounts receivable. Anything that you can do to manage that so that you turn more of that into cash, and I can see that turning into cash, again, is less risk. I'm going to discount what I see in terms of accounts receivable, because I'm not sure all of that's going to be collectible at all, and certainly maybe not in a timely fashion. Do you add anything to that?
Well, I think the other thing is adding to each of these bullets the stickiness or the staying power. So, when I was running the real estate development company and we would look at selling an office building, everyone would look at what was called the rent roll, which was all the tenants, which of course pay rent, and that is what drives the cash flow of the building. But you look at a tenant that has a 15-year lease and they're on year 2 differently than the tenant that had a 3-year lease and they were going into year 3. Because I can't guarantee that one's going to stay around. That requires me as the buyer to do some work to renew that lease, to shore up the cash flow, whereas the one that's in year 2 on a 15-year lease, unless they break the lease, they're not going anywhere. So I can bank on that cash flow. And I think a lot of people come in and say, well, we have this great team. Again, I as the buyer have to judge, is the team going to stay around?
Right.
Because there are probably more examples of a sale happening and a team leaving than there are a sale happening and a team staying.
Exactly right.
The cultural change, everything about the company changes when the ownership changes. And so if to your point, if everything relies on you or on 4 people and those 4 people don't stay, then I got to start over. Then really everything you built is I got to rebuild. And same thing with customer lists, because as founders of a company, we love to own those relationships. I mean, that's the bread and butter of our business. And as you build, it's the hardest thing in the world to let an employee start to take that relationship, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, if that relationship is so tied to your personal relationship with that customer and you leave and I'm the new buyer, then I don't know that that customer is going to stay with me. They could go to a competitor. They could, they could start producing it themselves, whatever, but they may not come to me anymore. And so, think about the things you can do before you have those conversations to solidify those assets. I mean, it could be getting contracts in place or renewing contracts ahead of time. You might have a 5-year contract with a client and you're thinking about selling the business and you're going into year 4, go ahead and go to that client and say, can we re-up that contract? Can we add another 3 years? Can we, those are things that you could use your relationship for to create value to the buyer as opposed to getting into discussions and now you're in negotiations and the buyer starts discounting all of your assets and then you're scrambling around saying, well, the guy said he's going to stay with you, but, what he said and what he does are 2 different things. So, those are some of the things, when you said sort of get your house in order before you go to sell it. And then same thing on the cash versus AR. For most businesses, AR is their largest asset. And you might say, well, it's just AR with Coke or with the government or what have you. But again, not only do I not know if it'll be collected, I don't know when it'll be collected, and you were the key relationship. So you might be able to call and scream and get payment to come in, but if I call as a new buyer and introduce myself, chances are that customer could decide to A, go somewhere else, and B, not pay me what they owed me because they don't know me. And I'm not going to chase them around. So, a lot of times customers take that opportunity to forget about what they already owed you. So to the extent, the best time to sell your business would be when your AR is almost nothing and your cash is well built up, because that's a known as opposed to a lot of AR. Also for your own aggravation, when Archie said be flexible, if you think about the deal negotiating process, the one sticking point, all of the negotiations will always be around the AR. That's where they're going to say, I need you to have an earn out, right? Like, I'm not going to let you leave till you've collected it, or you've got to commit to staying with me for a year to solidify all these contracts.
I'm going to create a huge escrow to hold back money until I see that AR come in. You're exactly right.
So all the certainty you can create means dollars immediately in your pocket. As all the uncertainty means either you give up dollars or the dollars get held out until you do something, which means you are not going to the beach.
At least not with all the money.
Not with all the money. Not with all the money.
I touched on that 4th category, that alignment with buyer strategy, and here's where I describe it as you do your best guesswork, or you do your best work to try and align with the broadest pool of buyers. But if you're doing it right, you probably won't know who the ultimate buyer is. And again, every buyer is going to care about those first 3 categories, right? Is there stickiness to that revenue? Is it going up and to the right? And is it high quality revenue? They're going to care about how profitable the business is and can be or will be under my ownership. And then they're going to care about those assets, right? How real are those assets, and will I be able to hold on to them, particularly for service businesses, as Laura touched on, where a lot of the assets are the relationships and the people that walk in and out of the door every day. And so how much of those can I really count on? This is the one place where outside advisor, whether it's an investment banker or a broker, is helpful. Now, again, normally, again, this is where you get an insight as a buyer. I actually like sellers who don't have this extra counsel with them, right? So if you show up to the table and all you think is Archie's the best buyer because he's in the same industry and we play at the same golf club together, that's my best target, because I'm going to negotiate probably a deal that is below market. And so you would never hear this from me if we were negotiating with each other. But as counsel to potential sellers, you should arm yourself with folks who, A, have a wide view of the marketplace. A number of the transactions that I've worked on ended up being, were international transactions, not because we wanted to be in the new geography, but we scoured the earth to find some customer base, some technology, or a set of solutions. And so I went to New Zealand to buy a piece of technology because I couldn't find it anywhere. I guarantee you that that seller in New Zealand didn't know who I was, didn't know my company, wouldn't have had me on his list, but I needed that piece of technology on his asset list that it would have cost me a lot more to build it internally and took a lot more time. So I ended up on his radar screen and looking to buy it and buying his business. That will be helped by, and there's folks, whether it's investment bankers or brokers, who will cast that wider net, that widest net of not just the guys and gals who you know, but also the folks who are either in a tangential business or a slightly related business that may be interested. They may just be interested in the geography. They've got the exact same business in Germany and want to put a footprint in the U.S., if you will, and you wouldn't have thought of them because you never run into them from a competitive standpoint, at least not in the local market.
The two stories that I would share, too, that relate to sort of getting that outside help. Don't assume that the outside help necessarily has to be an investment banker or someone that you hire. It could almost be a partner. And this isn't just for when you're selling your business. This could be in negotiating a big deal. But particularly if you're the smaller party, common knowledge, whether it's true or not, and I personally think it's not, but that's a small business person's view, is that the bigger company has the advantage, right, that size matters.
Right.
And so when you're going in, if you're negotiating sell to a much larger company than you are, their mindset is going to be that they're in the driver's seat. And so you could find maybe a partner, an alliance partner that you could bring in with you. And I did this one time. In fact, I remember having the conversation beforehand, and somebody was like, why are we bringing them along? They don't really add a lot of value. And my comment was, I just want them to stand there and look big. It's like a bodyguard, right? I mean, you're less apt to take advantage of me if somebody that looks as big as you is sort of standing there next to me, even if they don't have to do anything. They don't have to talk.
Right.
They have to stand there and look big. But it changes the dynamics in the room when you show the confidence of, maybe being a little bit bigger than you really are. The other thing that's interesting, a couple of years ago, we had a client here at Now Account. It was a technology startup here in Atlanta that was growing very fast. They had several large clients of theirs. They had large customers. And they were in the process of negotiating to sell to one of those large customers. It was actually Samsung. But Samsung was also their largest customer. So they were negotiating a sale to a customer. Not surprisingly, the customer was dragging their feet on paying their invoices. And of course, what Samsung is thinking is the longer I take to pay, the more stress that little business is going to be under, and I'm going to get a discount, right? Because they're going to be anxious to make a deal because they see their cash running out. And so, they signed on with us at Now Account really for that reason, because they were able to turn the accounts receivable into cash, build up their cash position so that they could hang on essentially, right? They had staying power. So Samsung probably thought, well, if we stress them enough, they'll just give in and we'll get a better deal. But they didn't give in because they knew they had enough cash flow to, keep the lights on for another 6 months. And so they ended up negotiating the deal they wanted. So, again, think about either the assets that you have that you can use to your advantage to sort of look stronger in the negotiation, or if you don't have the asset inside, borrow somebody's. Have them stand next to you so that you can at least change the mental positioning, right?
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Again, don't sell to Archie because you're doing that.
The last one on those 4 categories, valuation and structure. This I like to think about. It's interesting. We're on a tech call, but I think about it like grades in school. Right? Use a lot of energy
and spent. The forced curve.
You spend a lot of time saying, "Here's the grade I want. Here's the grade I want." And I have a lot of sellers who say, "Well, I had in mind this magical number, whatever that is. It's $10 million or whatever the number is." And instead of focusing on the inputs to that, right? If you do the homework and you actually prepare yourself in those first 4 categories, and that's why I laid out that scorecard almost like a report card, right? If you get A's across those 4 categories, it's almost impossible not to get an A valuation or the valuation you're looking for. Everywhere where you compromise or not able to drive the highest score you can in one of those categories, it's going to be a detractor from value. And so I know valuation is what a lot of people, they try and, spend all their time thinking about that, but it really is those first four categories. If you can drive it there, the valuation conversation actually becomes a lot easier, and you may actually surprise yourself. Because companies that have got A-pluses across all of those, again, are open to the widest range of buyers, and someone will get really aggressive. Again, I talked about I paid a lot for that company in New Zealand because they had exactly what I wanted, and whether they knew it or not.
Well, I think, too, that, valuation, to Archie's point, the wider base of potential buyers you can have, the more opportunity you have on valuation. So if you go into your mind saying, okay, I've got this company that makes widgets, and I can only sell it to companies that, currently buy those widgets or use it for X, then you've probably kind of boxed in your valuation a little bit. You may find, you could be building a product that you think you would likely sell to one type of company, say at a bank. But then you find out that Google might be interested in buying that. Well, Google's not a bank. They're not even in necessarily financial services, but maybe they are. Maybe Google Payments aspires to grow into that space. So, again, that's where some of these business advisors can help, because they may think broader. You may define your business as X, when really there's an industry out there that could benefit from your business being part of theirs, as opposed to your business being their whole business. So, a lot of entrepreneurs, we tend to think that the world starts and ends with our business, and that's how we view the market, as opposed to, what if my business was one small piece
of a bigger business? A key enabler of some other broader business.
Because that business is apt to pay you more because you fill in a puzzle piece they don't have, as opposed to someone buying your business and operating it as a standalone business. If someone's buying your business and operating it as a standalone business, then it really does rely on what is the growth potential, what is your profitability, and will it continue. But if your business becomes a smaller piece of their larger puzzle, then they're apt to give you a premium, like you did New Zealand, right? I need that piece.
That's exactly
right. And so what they've generated out of it may not be as relevant because I can generate more.
Because I was taking that New Zealand solution and going global with it.
Right.
They weren't going to leave the island with that solution, and I was going to take it around the world. That's exactly right, and I was willing to pay up for that.
Right. So, they may have capabilities beyond you, and yours just becomes a tool to their capabilities. That's really where your biggest upside opportunity probably is. And so, at the end of the day, I think we talk a lot about assets, but you also want to look at the liability side of your balance sheet as well, because someone might deduct for that. I've seen people who have tried to sell their company, and they can show its potential growth looks great, the market size looks great, but then they've strapped their balance sheet with a whole bunch of debt, and the buyer doesn't want that. Now, of course, there's ways for the buyer to get rid of that. But some buyers may not want to have to negotiate that, or they may not want to inherit that.
And it's less cash to you, even if they did figure it out, or that's going to someone else, whoever you got the loan from.
Right.
You can reduce that. That's more in the equity column / the owner's pocket.
So, the way I think about this chart is, if I have a business, the extent I can optimize my cash flow from operations, someone's going to pay me full credit for that. To the extent I've got debt on my balance sheet, that could be a deduction, right? That's to your point, make it easy to sell. That's a hiccup. That's something I got to work through. And to the extent you've sold a whole bunch of equity in your business, you may get a valuation, but it's being divided by a larger denominator. So, I always laugh. I think in our market today, particularly in some of the high-tech markets, we've become so accustomed to celebrating businesses that raise a lot of money, and somehow we equate that to value. And I always laugh when I see a press release that says, this business just raised $100 million of equity, because all I keep thinking is, I'm not sure that means the value of the company is that. It just means you've now got a whole bunch more people to share your company with. If I sell my business for $100 million and I've raised $2 million versus $20 million, people that raise the two get a whole lot more money.
Right, they win.
So, the smaller denominator, of course, means more value to you. So think about that, in terms of where you think the ultimate market potential is, and make sure you don't raise too much equity relative to that. Otherwise, I know a lot of people who say, well, when I started, I had 100% of the business, and I got sold on this great vision of a smaller piece of a bigger pie, and then I found out that it didn't taste so good, you know, because the pie, while it got bigger, didn't get that much bigger,
Right.
and it was divided by so many pieces that I just got a taste. You know?
Right. I'm still very hungry.
Still very hungry. That's right. So, you know, again, just think through the dollars you bring in. I was actually talking to a tech alum the other day who had been involved in the Adventure Prize, and, you know, they got so much publicity, and they went out and they raised some equity from a venture capital firm in Europe, and it all seemed great until it wasn't, right? And so now there are even bigger growth opportunities, and they've got some new investors, but they're having to undo the old stuff, and that hurts, and it hurts in your pocket, and it hurts emotionally. So, you know, all money is not good. Make sure it's the right money sort of at the right time. And I think that's the last slide we had. So,
we'll open it up
all right,
to questions.
fantastic.
Questions?
Yes.